So what led you to the bombing film, American
Well,
Bomber?
so an American bombing started really for
Bombing.
me good 29 years ago. I did a film on the Oklahoma City bombing for NBC with Bill Moyers called Oklahoma City 1 Year Later, which focused on the survivors and the families of victims. And three or four, five of the characters that are I met back then in Oklahoma City in 1995 are in this documentary that'll be on HBO on April 16th. So that was really the beginning. We stayed in touch. And then HBO, which I've had a great working relationship with in discussing, what we might do next. Nancy Abraham said, "Didn't you do a film on the Oklahoma City bombing?" And I said, "Yeah." "Why?" And she said, "Well, I was talking to my children who were both in college, good colleges, and somehow it came up, and my children said, 'What's the Oklahoma City bombing?'" And she said, "I don't think a younger generation really knows much about that story. And it's an absolutely important story, especially given what we're dealing with today in terms of political violence and threats, etc." Uh, so Daphne Pinkerson, my producer, and I came back to our shop and asked some of the young people who I know you're going to talk to a year later, "What do you know about the Oklahoma City bombing?" And sure enough, it was like, "Not really. What was that? Was that the guy that sent bombs in the mail?" Which, of course, was the Unabomber. And you ever hear of Timothy McVeigh? No, who was he? So anyway, that plus meeting Katie Couric, who had been in discussions with the HBO about a series she was pitching, like, then and now, about big stories she covered as the host of the Today Show, and then the first woman anchor on CBS. And she had suggested a pilot might be the Oklahoma City bombing, where she was literally there the next morning. And HBO said, "Would you like to meet Katie?" And we said, "Yeah." So we did, and she shared with us the manuscript of her upcoming memoir. And we thought it was fantastic. And it was a lot more uh, feisty, funny, smart than I had anticipated. And so we hit it off. And so that was kind of the beginning. Katie on one side, the fact that we had done this film 29 years ago. And then finally, I'd add, over the course of my career, I have done quite a number of films looking at some of the more extremist elements in our society. I go back to a film I did with my father, Al Levin, called Portrait of an American Zealot, which is in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art. That film kind of followed a character named Ed McAteer, who started the Religious Roundtable, but he's the one that brought the Christian fundamentalists into the Republican Party. Jerry Falwell, James Robison, etc. So did that in the 80s. I did with Bill Moyers, Constitution in Crisis, Secret Government, which was a huge project. For HBO, I did a film called Soldiers in the Army of God, which looked at the anti-abortion underground that was targeting doctors to assassinate them. And after 9/11, I did Protocols of Zion, a look at the rise in anti-Semitism in the wake of the tragedy of 9/11. And I personally, it was the only film that I stepped from behind the camera. I personally confronted and had dialogue with some of the most extreme groups, neo-Nazis, white power groups. So this this theme has run through my work, and it's kind of, this is a great coming full circle in many ways. This film, An American Bombing, The Road to April 19th. McVeigh actually considered the photo opportunities that would exist after the bombing, and he knew that it was unobstructed, so that it would be photographed and be very dramatic. Whereas a lot of other buildings, and certainly downtown, the Federal Building downtown, they're all surrounded by skyscrapers, et cetera. This building was in a spot, there was a lot of open space. One of the considerations that did make the Murrow building attractive to terrorists was that it was open. In other words, it wasn't surrounded by lots of other buildings. One of the amazing revelations in the film, and that I was not really aware, although I know there were stories in the New York Times back in '95, the idea that the Murrow building actually had been a target of the so-called white power patriot movement back in 1983, 12 years before the Oklahoma City bombing. That was mind-blowing. I didn't know that at the time we did Oklahoma City 1 year later.
McVeigh knew it.
Well, that's a big question. I assume he did, but in his as told to autobiography, he obviously does his best to portray the mission as him. As his lawyer, Stephen Jones, says in our film, he wanted it to be known the bombing was done by me, myself, and I, nobody else. He wanted, as Jones says, the infamy alone.
So this is going to run on HBO, and it's going to rerun on HBO, but then it's going to their streaming platform, correct?
That is correct. It'll be up on HBO and Max on April 16th. Of course, April 19th, which is 3 days later, is a very, very significant date that most Americans are not aware of. It's called Patriots Day because the so-called shot heard around the world, the first shot in the Revolutionary War at Lexington and Concord, was fired there. But it has been hijacked in a way by the far right as their day. And the fact that the Waco tragedy happened on April 19th, the bombing of the Murrow building happened on April 19th, and even the Columbine shooting, originally the two shooters wanted to do it on April 19th, aware of the significance of that date. But they didn't have all the ammunition and elements they wanted, so they ended up doing it the next day, the 20th. But that day is an important day for all Americans to understand, and especially now, given where we're at, the threats of political violence. These threats of violence have to be taken seriously. And certainly April 19th is a day, I'm just assuming that Homeland Security, ATF, FBI, everybody is going to be on full alert.
A lot of overtime.
Well, Scott doesn't know this, but the darkest part of April 19th is that's when my ex-wife was born.
Well, yeah, which ex-wife?
Right, well, there's a footnote for you. After this film comes out on April 16th, 10 days later, Slam, which the poster is right behind me, is going to be commercially released, starting in New York City at the Roxy Cinema, the new Roxy Cinema, on April 26th. So that is being released by Kino Lorber. The popular kind of understanding of what happened on April 19th, 1995, is that Timothy McVeigh was kind of a lone, disgruntled, alienated ex-vet with maybe a friend or two who pulled this horrible tragedy off. What was missing, and what I feel is the importance of the film that we've just done, is we provide a context, a historic context. Timothy McVeigh did not come out of nowhere. He came out of and was supported and nurtured by a movement. Now, whether any of those people in that movement were criminally liable or knew the exact time and date. You know, that will be debated, and it is now for many years to come. But what is a fact is that movement, which I just told you, even had targeted the Murrow building back in '83. That movement has gone mainstream. The ideas that McVeigh believed in and tried to spread for 2 years as he, went around the country and went to gun shows are very much in mainstream circulation now. Whereas back in '95, they were on the fringe and everyone was, condemning these ideas. Now they are, you can hear them, and from the governor's offices in certain states, from the House of Representatives. So this is a huge, huge change in Americans, many Americans now accepting that political violence is acceptable. And that's a very scary thought.
Do you think he was a martyr in that respect?
Well, that is part of the story. I don't think he's a martyr, but there are people in that movement who believe he is a martyr. In fact, Kathy Wilburn, who's one of the characters in the film and who lost her 2 grandbabies in the bombing, she has devoted her life to trying to understand what happened and to try to answer some of the so-called unanswered questions. And she certainly went out to Aryan nations where a lot of these groups met every summer, where they declared war on the United States back in 1983. And during the sermon from the leader of Aryan nations, he said Timothy McVeigh was a martyr. And there are many people who believe that. And McVeigh, at the time he did the bombing, believed there was an invisible army of Americans that supported his ideas and his ideology, and the so-called need for a second American Revolution. And at that time, people thought, wow, the guy is a lunatic. He's lost it. But look at where we're at today. In fact, on the end of next week, a film is coming out called Civil War, a scripted feature being released by A24, which kind of gives us a look at what it might look like in a few years if there really was a violent insurgency, as sadly many other countries have faced. So that's the relevance of what we're talking about here is, yes, the Oklahoma City bombing happened on April 19th, 1995.
Waco happened on 1993.
That's right. It happened on the 2nd anniversary of Waco, and that was one of the motives of McVeigh, was vengeance for what happened in Waco.
Look, it looks like Mae West was sentenced to 10 days in jail on April 19, convicted of obscenity and corrupting the morals of youth with her portrayal of a prostitute in the Broadway play Sex, which she also wrote. Publicity made her nationally known. It's a big day in history.
You can't ignore the 2 big unanswered questions around the Oklahoma City bombing. One, were there others involved, that we don't know and have never identified? And 2, did the FBI and or the ATF have prior warning? And there's no doubt that they had an informant in Elohim City, this Christian identity community, that was telling them they're talking about bombing federal buildings and other violent actions against the government. Now, whether that was taken seriously, mishandled, ignored, whether the competition between these agencies, you can imagine after Waco and Ruby Ridge, both of which were instigated initially by the ATF, and then the FBI had to kind of come in and try to clean up the mess. So those are legitimate questions And we can't ignore them. That was our feeling. At the same time, we didn't want to lose this bigger picture, what I call the meta story, which would be that there's this movement that in many ways nurtured McVeigh, that he got his ideas from. The Turner Diaries came out of, which was his Bible, this work of fiction about how a white power insurgency could actually happen in the United States. And given where we're at today, seeing the reemergence of some of these ideas, and certainly, you know, what happened on January 6th, I didn't want to lose that big story. So it was trying to find the balance. And, you know, HBO was constantly part of that discussion, and I think it worked out.
We mention that Columbine was April 19th?
It was planned for April 19th. They originally planned to bomb the school. That was the idea. It was going to be like McVeigh. They were going to blow up the school.
It says here they actually entered the school on the 19th in 1999. So,
right, but they didn't have it together. They came back the next day,
they scouted
armed,
that day.
armed, and that day turns out to be Hitler's birthday, April 20th. But they were mindful of the significance of this date, and in their minds, they had seen Waco, Oklahoma City, Columbine, and the Turner Diaries. You know, you would say, well, you know, how can a bunch of radical extremists actually take on the United States government? That's what the Turner Diaries was all about. It gave a blueprint for how really a terrorist organization, a domestic terrorist organization, could operate and disrupt the most powerful, nation in the world.
You see, on the 19th, that was the day that the guy who shot George Floyd, who got convicted, he was convicted on the 19th. And to top it off, in 1914, the striking miners and their families in Ludlow, Colorado, were attacked by the state's National Guard and company guards, and 25 people were killed, including 11 children. And the massacre resulted in a bloody retaliation by other miners in Colorado. 19th. So,
all right, well, everybody needs to be on alert on April 19th. No doubt about it.
Right. Well, it was the first time a woman won the Indianapolis 500 too. So maybe they were just down that day. I don't know.
Didn't know that one.
Yeah. Well,
by the way, my ex-wife is taking kickboxing lessons, so we really got to watch out now. Okay, we got to be careful.